It's daylight savings time, so
Oh,
it takes longer.
I almost believed you.
Good evening. I would like to call the public hearing of the South Windsor Planning and Zoning Commission for Tuesday, March 24th to order. Let's all silence our cell phones. The first order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. First order of business is to have the secretary read the legal notice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Notice is hereby given that there will be a public hearing on Tuesday, March 24, 2026 at 7 p.m. in the Madam Room on the downstairs level of the South Windsor Town Hall to consider the following. 1. Application 26-05P, Phantom Fireworks Eastern Region LLC, request for a 2-year temporary and conditional permit, Section 2.13.a, to allow for tent sale of fireworks from June 25 through July 4th, 2026 on property located at 942-946 Sullivan Avenue, Colony Shops, GC Zone. Copy of the application are on file in the office of the town clerk and or planning department and online at www.southwindsor-ct.gov. Planning department pages, planning and zoning commission applications. At this hearing, interested persons may be heard and written comments may be by the public will be received by mail or email. Persons who may require an accommodation can contact staff at 860-644-2511, extension 2329. Paul Burstein, Chair, Planning and Zoning Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. So our procedure for the public hearing will be that on each application, we'll hear from the applicant, then we'll hear from town staff, then from members of the public who wish to comment, first in favor and then against or neutral, and all public comments. After that, we'll hear comments from the commissioners. If you wish to provide testimony, please approach the podium, sign in, identify yourself, speak clearly. Our first application is application 2605P, Phantom Fireworks Eastern Region LLC. Do we have someone from the applicant who would like to speak?
Yes.
You're on, sir.
Good evening, all. My name is,
Sign in over there.
good evening, my name is Jack Clarksville. I have been duly appointed to be the liaison for Phantom Fireworks at Youngstown, Ohio. What they're seeking to do is to set up a tent 20 feet by 30 feet with a storage pod behind it for the product. And that would be for June the 25th through July 4th is when they'll be having the sales. As common is that the pod would be delivered approximately a week prior. Then the product will be delivered and stored in the pod and locked in the pod. And then once the tent is then erected and delivered, it will be with concrete bowls that will hold it in place for them. And every morning, the individuals that are going to be operating the tent will come in, they'll set up the tent, put all the product inside the tent, and then at night, they'll put everything into the pod and lock it up. And the same thing for the full 10-day period. At the end of the event, any of the trash that's there, they will remove. The pod company will, first the company will come and pick up whatever merchandise is left over, will be palletized for them. And then the pod company will come in, they'll pick up their pod, and the tent company will come in, they'll remove their tent.
Is that the conclusion of your presentation? Before I turn it over to town staff, can you spell your last name for me?
K is in King, W, A, S is in Sam, T is in Thomas, E is in Edward, L is in Lincoln.
Thank you, Jack. Now I turn it to town staff.
Thank you. So this is request for a 2-year temporary conditional permit to allow for tent sale of fireworks from July 25th to July 4th on property located 942, 946 Sullivan Ave, which is the Colony Shops in the general commercial zone. The hours of operation, I have incorrect, would be 10 a.m. to 9 p.m., not 9 to 10. I inverted the numbers there. So as indicated, the applicant's proposing a 20 by 30 tent. We do have an aerial that you can see where it's proposed to be located with a storage box on site for supplies. The applicant will be required to take out a building permit, and it will be approved by both the planning, the building, and the fire marshal as well. We did have original discussions where they wanted to locate it originally was closer to the road, and the fire marshal indicated he wanted it further back because we do have some new businesses opening up in the front there. So plenty of room out there for this to be set up. So there's adequate parking on site. If there's signage necessary once they set up to direct people, we can work with them on doing that. They can take out temporary sign permits for the sales to have something out front. So I think they should do very well at that location. The wording of the temporary conditional permit states that a permit may be granted by the commission for a period not to exceed 2 years. Such approval may be given after a public hearing if in the judgment of the commission, the public convenience and welfare will be substantially served and the appropriate use of neighboring property will not be substantially or permanently injured and traffic and other hazards will not result from such use. If approved, this planning department has no additional modifications. If it does get approved for 2 years, we would just ask the applicant to submit the dates next year. And again, it does go through a permitting process. So, and that's really all I have. Thank you.
I don't see a whole lot of people in our audience. Do we have anyone who would like to comment on this application? Do we have any letters by chance?
No.
No letters, no emails? In that case, we will turn it over to commissioners, starting with Commissioner Welsh,
I have no comments.
Commissioner Abramson.
I'm just trying to place it. I thought I knew the Colony Shops. All the way in back, there used to be a bar.
Right, it'd be almost in
And
front
this
of
is
that.
kind of in front of that.
Right.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
that's what I thought.
So there'll be plenty of egress for the 2 restaurants that are there right now.
Yeah, but then you're not very visible from the street.
But what they do is they do have signage that'll say fireworks that can go into the island as you pull in, so people can see it then from the street.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I only had questions about the cleanup after the fact, but you did mention about the palletizing of everything going back and probably the cleanup in the surrounding area.
There won't be any, but whatever cardboard boxes, whoever is operating it will take that away and find a dumpster or town dump to put them in. That's what we do.
That was my only question.
Commissioner Dexter.
I'm just curious, because it's 2-year, let's just say miraculously in the next year or so, something happens in this plaza and they're
We'll review the
redeveloping.
location of it with them at that time. If
Okay.
there's something that comes up.
You would
It's
work
real-
around it?
Yeah, we will work around it.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big enough area there.
Yes.
Yeah, and if it is really, the owner may not want to have them if it's too crowded, right?
Okay.
It just happens to be I don't know if anybody recalls, but we've done this in other locations in town in previous years. Other fireworks have shown up at different areas. This isn't it's the first time I think Phantom's been in our
Yeah,
town, but we've had other ones
Route 5
over the
is
years.
usually where, okay, thank you.
Commissioner Kilburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question on, what do you have to do in your facility and set up to satisfy a fire marshal?
Whatever the fire marshal gives for compliance. I know that the tent is usually opened on all 4 sides. There are exit signs on 2 of the signs that are illuminated. There will be a CO2 extinguisher as well as a water extinguisher in the tent. There will be signs stating about, that it is fireworks. And the fire marshal does come in prior and can come in any time during the time of sales to check the products to make sure they're in compliance with the state laws.
Just wondering, thank you.
That's it for you?
I apologize, I ran a tent for them in Willimantic last year, so that's how I'm a little familiar with their operation. And I mean, they're very meticulous on the way they do things.
Okay.
So this is the site where the country store and Red Cabin are?
Correct.
Right, yeah. So I can't ever remember an application for fireworks coming before us, at least since I've been on the commission. I'm assuming there's nothing in the regulations that,
That's why it's a temporary conditional permit, because it's,
Okay.
you know, it's longer than a 24 or 48-hour event. So once something's longer than 72 hours, it kicks in this if you don't have a regulation for it.
okay, so your narrative references that the fire marshal is okay with this, there's no.
Yeah, he's the one that reviewed the original plan when it came in and told them they had to relocate it. So, I mean, he already has looked at it originally, then, but again, when it goes in for permitting, when the
Yeah.
tank he will also sign off on it and go out and do inspections on it. So it will be, go through our normal permitting process.
There's no reference to the police, do they need to?
Well, they were sent a
Yeah.
notice of it, they're aware of it. So if they, had anything in particular, I probably would have heard something.
Who owns this piece of real estate?
It's actually owned by somebody, I believe, it's a new owner in the last 5 years, because the owner that was there forever passed away.
Okay,
I don't think they're local, but, so it's a fairly new owner.
that wouldn't be an issue if they're not even local.
Yeah, I just don't remember the name, I can find out for you, it's probably right here in the file, if I looked. Give me a second, I can probably tell you.
Those
The owner is-
are all the questions I have.
It's owned by the Kavita Ahmad Family Trust.
All right.
So it's like I said, I think it's about 5 years ago that they purchased it. Time flies right now. Sure.
Does town staff or any of the commissioners have anything else? Any reason to keep the public hearing open?
I don't think so.
In that case, let us close the public hearing at 7:12. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you.
That's the only public hearing we had tonight, so we can move into our regular meeting. First order of business is minutes. Everyone have a chance to review the minutes? Are any comments? If not, we can accept by consensus. We all good with that?
Yes, we are.
Yes, I'm good.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, do you want to see Mr. Kilburn for one of your regular members?
Thank you. We'll see Commissioner Kilburn for Commissioner Foley.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Public participation. I don't see anyone who has a need to come forward. So then we'll move into application 2605, Phantom Fireworks Eastern Region LLC. I would be waiting on a motion.
Make a motion to approve application 26-05P, Phantom Fireworks LLC. Temporary and conditional permit will expire on March 24th, 2028, and must be renewed if the use is going to continue. This approval is for the sale of fireworks at 942-946 Sullivan Ave from June 24th to July 4th, 2026, from 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. If the applicant decides to sell from this property next year, the dates must be submitted to the planning department in advance. Building department and fire marshal's office must be consulted. Proper permits obtained for the outdoor storage tent. If there are buildings, structures, or other items that require a building permit or other town, state approvals or permits, all such approvals or permits must be obtained prior to construction or use of the site. And finally, all freestanding signs and/or building signs, temporary or permanent, require the issuance of a sign permit before they are erected.
We have a motion and conditions.
Seconded.
Seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Application passes. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you.
Application 2602P, Partridge Meadows 3, 555 Dart Hill Road, LLC. Request for 2 90-day extensions to file the Mylar in the office of the town clerk.
It's a standard request, you know, they're finalizing plans, and it gives them some time before they have to incur the cost of the filing, so.
So we need to approve this?
You do, yeah, under state statutes, you're allowed to give them up to 2 90-day extensions, so it's.
Do I have a motion to approve this application or this request? Anyone?
A motion to approve this request for a
90-day extension.
90-day extension.
Second?
Second.
All approved or all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes. Item 3, discussion regarding draft text amendment addressing changes required with Public Act 25-1 for housing in commercial areas and parking requirements.
Did you have an extra copy?
Of the,
Yeah, what do you think is easiest, Paul, for me just to kind of, run through it and then take questions, or?
Yeah, I mean,
Concept, I'm gonna give you my.
we'll keep this very informal.
Yeah. So, yeah, just so, you know, we've been talking a little bit about what the law is requiring us to do and whatnot, and just kind of a preview. I've talked a little bit with the town attorney, and he kind of, you know, agreed that we'd go forward tonight. We're giving you some information and get what kind of questions you have, and he's still got to, you know, look at it a little closer. You know, I've been part of a lot of discussions at the CROG level and with other planners on how they're doing it and whatnot. So I do have 2 other really important sessions before one of our next meetings that will be specifically on this, so bear with me if I suggest some other changes beyond that, but kind of what the approach is that I've taken is, what the law is requiring us to do is to allow for housing in our commercial zone. You know, that's kind of the nuts and bolts of it. And what it's requiring us to do is 2 things. It's requiring us to allow what they call transit community middle housing, and it's defined very specifically, and you got the definition in here, as one type of housing, and that is 2 to 9 units, right? They can be in one building, they can be a cluster, they could be triplexes, you know, it's really undefined as to what they have to be. So it's an or and situation, a mixed-use situation where you have a mixed-use building, which is commercial and residential in one building. That doesn't have a unit count associated with it. So the housing, a standalone housing is a 2 to 9 unit of transit middle. The mixed use is mixed use. And what the law goes on to say is you have to approve it by what they call summary review. Well, summary review is not a zoning term that anybody's really familiar with. I found out today that it is referenced once in statute, and it's in some law related to nursing homes and how you can change nursing homes. It's by a summary review. So what summary review kind of defines, when you look at the definition, it kind of goes back to site plan requirements, right? You can do bulk requirements, you have to approve it, it says, if it meets your bulk requirements that are set up. That's what the summary review basically says, is we can't make it by special exception, we have to allow it as a right use. So, knowing our zoning regulations, and people may not even be aware of this because it's never been utilized, we've always had a mixed use provision in our commercial zones. You could have, and we had one project approved way back in 2007 and never was built, but you could come in today under existing zoning and propose a mixed-use building on a commercial property where you have commercial on the first level and residential on the second. And we had very special criteria, how much storage had to be, and, there's regulations, right? So my thinking was to take that regulation kind of as a base, because we kind of vetted out what a residential use might look like on a commercial property, or what things we might be concerned about. So my idea was to use that as a base for what I wrote. So you'll see in the regulations I gave to you tonight, when we get into that part of it, I deleted our whole mixed-use regulation, but I used it kind of to set this, this stage for what I did write. So, just starting at the beginning here, it's just the table of contents, I'm just highlighting in red the changes. So going directly to your use table, we're adding 2 types of uses. We're adding a mixed-use development use.
Michelle, what might be helpful as we go through this is to come up with examples,
Okay.
like with the transit community middle housing. I think we had a very brief discussion about how this could be an application on the lot we were just talking
Yeah,
about?
so what I'd like to do is, once we talk about the use table, we'll look at the zoning map too, so you can kind of get it. So the use table changes are really minor in nature, they're just adding those two uses, right? But when the law says you have to do it in your commercial zones, I don't know if we're lucky or not, but we have a lot of commercial zoning. You have your general commercial zone, which is your Sullivan Ave corridor, so anything that's in pink would qualify. You have, this is a restricted commercial, restricted office, so office is a commercial zoning, so it would apply in a restricted office zone. Really, on this map here, what doesn't qualify is gonna be your industrial zone, which is the blue, the light blue. This darker blue, our I-291 corridor development zone, the first word it says permitted uses are commercial uses, so I don't know how you cannot say it doesn't apply there. And then your residential zones, you don't have to allow it in your residential zones. Now, if you look at the law, if you allow it, if you decide you wanna allow it in your residential zones, you can earn some more points towards a housing moratorium. I don't know if we, and I think we're just gonna focus on what we're required to do at this point, which again is the commercial zones. So that's kind of there, your Buckland Quarter Development Zone, it would apply during that, it would apply in this portion of design commercial. So, when you're talking about someone who might wanna do a small project, 2 to 9 units, I tend to think of some of these pieces that are more on the edge, like the piece we were talking about today, that's an underdeveloped piece where the Phantom Fireworks is. The back of that piece has actually got some commercial land there. It abuts up to a residential neighborhood. Could a couple of units conceivably, have people asked me about doing units there before? Yeah, they have. So, that's not an unrealistic thought. I think of pieces down on Route 5. We rezoned that piece behind Dunkin' Donuts. Remember the machine, or the guy that's doing concrete on it? We rezoned 3 acres there. It's wide open right next to the
2 years ago.
yeah, so it's right down next to the skating rink,
Oh, okay.
just north of that. You're right in a residential community right there. It's kind of a commercial residential mix. To me, that's another site that could, lend itself probably to this kind of use. So I think that that we are a community that does have properties that, might see this. So it's good to give some thought to what we're doing here. So again, kind of the premise of how I wrote this regulation is, the idea of your underlying use of general commercial or restricted commercial, you already have setbacks, right? We already have impervious coverage regulations, we have block coverage regulations, we have lighting regulations, we have landscaping regulations. We have all those elements already. And if they're telling us that when we put in our commercial zones, we have to allow them as of right by site plan, that's kind of how I wrote the regulation. And, we allow certain things, and then you gotta go to the lighting section to be in compliance with our dark sky compliance. You have to go to our landscaping to do the landscaping. I wrote a section related to the buffering. I don't think, how your buffer works, just to educate, especially newer folks. When your zone lines come up against each other, residential against commercial, whether it's industrial, restricted commercial, general commercial, you have a 50-foot buffer requirement on both sides of the line. I'm just talking about this is brand new development. The idea being that the commercial developer shouldn't have to pay for the buffer, nor should the residential developer. Both of them want to be protected from each other. If you're going to add residential into a commercial zone, to me, I'd rather see a less of a buffer where you have residential against residential, and let's add some buffering inside the development where you're up against your commercial. So I try to do that in this regulation. I tried to, because we do have other areas and regulations where we treat our housing developments, our multifamily housing developments slightly differently when it comes to buffering. We reduce the size of the buffer. So you'll see that that's a red line in there that I put in there, so that if something were to happen in the general commercial zone, that 50-foot buffer would be reduced to 25 if it was gonna be a residential. So I've gone to a couple seminars, and I think Paul sat on the same one I did the other night. There's some different thinking. Like, I was with some CROG planners today, and they're like, well, we're suggesting that you add a use column of summary review instead of site plan or special exception or permitted, put SA or SR, summary review. And that's kind of what Paul questioned, should we have summary review in our use table? I think that's confusing because I'm not sure what it means other than site plan approval. So that's kind of one that I have for the town attorney. I mean, because everything about how they're defining summary review is what I know to be a site plan. And is what we've learned is you can't require things beyond what your site plans require if it's a permitted use. So I don't feel like, and I guess what people are telling me that a lot of towns have regulations that are more subjective or more unpredictable when it comes to, you know, what might get required of a plan coming in. So there might be reasons to be more prescriptive in your writing of the regulation. Like, I think the copy I gave you, there's a whole yellow highlighted section in there, and I'm like, do we really want to add that kind of stuff? I mean, do we really want to tell people the pitch of the roof they need to do? And I guess some communities that don't have design review or don't have architectural considerations, you know, need to put that stuff in the regulations to make, so those are some of the areas where I'm just really not quite sure how far to take the regulation that, you know, we tend to get nice design projects just by the nature of the regulations we have, requiring full cutoff lighting. You know, our parking lot standards are for every 10 spaces, you have to have a tree. So that's kind of why I question whether to do that or not. So that's just some food for thought, you know, how detailed oriented do we want to be and what we want to see. I kind of wrote it too, that if you're going to go into the Buckland Gateway zone, if there's stricter architectural standards in the zone you're in, you got to adhere to them. So a use going in the Buckland Gateway zone would have to adhere to the site plan requirements we have for architecture in the Buckland Gateway zone. I think that's okay. You know, so a lot of this I'm just writing, you know, based on what what we're being told to write, what to allow. The one that came up just recently, I was talking with someone and they asked me about the office conversion overlay zone. If we've gone and turned property to office through the office conversion overlay zone, should it apply to that? Well, it just so happens the person wants to do that there. I'm like, well, you know, we probably do have to apply it to office conversion overlay zones where it's already gone into an office use and now someone wants to add a residential back to it.
Can I jump in with,
Sure.
So Michelle being proactive as she is, sitting in on these seminars, going to these meetings and, you know, trying her best to understand the new legislation that's coming down to us, went ahead and did this. This was a very proactive thing to do. I'm not sure many towns have done this. But to kind of get it up 10,000 feet. So the gestalt here is that the state and the towns and the COGS have a responsibility to grow housing and affordable housing. So if you remember, I think we went over this flow chart. It's all working towards this. So there's due dates on here where certain things have to happen. And, you know, like I said, what Michelle is doing is getting ahead of it by trying to, you know, dot some of the i's and cross some of the t's. One of the things I want to ask you about, so in the design standards, the yellow area, and I think I sent you a note on this. When I watched the seminar, Mark Brantz, the attorney that presented.
Very specific about thinking you needed those.
Well, these are recommendations. So, because he kept saying, you might want to do this, you might want to do this. So I guess the two decisions we have is, do we even want to specify to this level of detail? And then, you know, what, do we want to use these? Because these were his ideas.
Yeah, you could have it be anything you want, right?
So, I mean, if we want to do that, then I think we clearly have to get someone with architectural background involved. And, you know, we have the committee to help us with that if we want to go down that road. This is as good a time as any for me to jump in with something I want to do. When I started looking at this and understanding what was coming at us, a comment I made at one of these meetings is I think we need like a subcommittee, because at the end of the day, we are going to have to come up with developable land somehow. And, you know, talking to Michelle, she says that's going to be easier than maybe to me, it sounds like brain surgery to come up with developable land. I've already recruited Kevin and I want to be on that subcommittee. I would like 2 more people to,
You can't, then you're a quorum, I can only have 3 people.
can only have 3?
Yeah,
Then
you
I
can't
need
have a quorum.
one other. Anyone want to volunteer to be on that? I don't know
It'll still be
how,
posted in their meetings, but you don't really want a PCC quorum.
yeah, I don't know how often we'll meet or what the need will be, but I think at the end of the day, once we start hitting some of these thresholds, we're gonna wanna be ahead of this as opposed to, you know, running to catch our tail, so to speak.
And one thing I can speak to that is, there was just a notice that came out today, the GIS that we're talking about, the state GIS is sponsoring something that I'll bring our GIS to about the housing law and how the data's gonna be coming down and what the expectation is. So they're already starting to come out with some of that information. And, you know, we'll attend anything we need to make sure we're, so I've already got our new GIS person forewarned.
Okay.
This is what we're gonna be looking at, so.
Mr. Chair, I would like to volunteer for
You wanna volunteer?
subcommittee.
I'm good with that, and then I would obviously need you and,
Yeah, you know,
Deeply
what we
involved.
like to do, if you're available, is have it like at 5 or 5:30 on Mondays, is that anything?
that's fine, yeah.
Does that work for you though? I know does it? Because we're already here at Town Hall and it just, you know, kind of makes it easier for.
That's how we did,
We've done
I
several
mean,
of them that way, yeah.
the sign thing that we did was
Yeah.
Mondays like 6, right?
It was earlier than that.
And we did that Wheeler Road
You-
thing. at
yeah.
Monday
Did that,
nights.
yeah. I'll coordinate with you, I don't know when, if you wanna wait just a little while before you set it up, or how quickly you wanna set it up, or what.
I don't have a need, I mean, right now, the ball is in their court.
Yeah, we don't have
We,
anything.
we
to-
don't have anything to do for a while,
We'll just
but,
keep collecting the information as it comes in. Really, the pressing thing we have, as much as it's pressing, is we do have a July 1 deadline to adopt regulations related to this commercial housing. So, that means if you back it up, you wanna have a public hearing sometime in June, you wanna go to CROG first part of May with your comments. So it really gives you, you know, the month of April to try to massage something. Maybe by your first meeting in May, you'd wanna have a draft.
I was kind of curious, so the town comes up with what we think is developable land, not
No,
them?
no, so what happens is, CROG's gonna have a methodology that they're gonna share with the town of what they're gonna do. If a town thinks it's gonna go out on its own, right, if you think you're not gonna go along with the CROG's idea, you wanna almost be doing it in parallel to make
Gotcha.
sure you know what's happening.
Okay,
That's
makes
what it would
sense.
be. I think the thing that I always go back to with developable land, you know, kind of knowing the town as well as I do, is we have so many pieces that on the surface would be like, yep, you could go there, and then you look and it's open space, it was bought with bond money, you can't touch it. It was open
That's
space,
what
it was
it's
bought with federal money, you can't, you know, I don't know what level they're gonna do deed searches on things like that, you know, so it's hard for me to understand how they're gonna approach the developable land until I see them.
So our open space is up for grabs?
No, it wouldn't be, so that's what I'm
Oh,
saying, that
okay,
if something is
okay.
deed restricted, it can't be, but if you have
Gotcha.
open space that's just, for example, the piece of property that's on the corner of West and Sullivan, that is not deed restricted anyhow. That was bought with cash.
Okay. The
So
one they
that's
wanted
a
to-
town piece in theory that, you know,
The one that, not the soccer field across the front of the firehouse?
Yep.
Gotcha.
I don't see anything on here that would indicate we need to have a public hearing in May.
no, I'm talking about if you're adopting a zoning regulation, you know,
Yeah.
to adopt zoning regulations, you have to have public hearings. So
Okay.
I'm just backing it, you know, when we do a text amendment, we send it to CROG, we have a 35-day window to send it to CROG before we can hold a public hearing, so.
Do you see any, so you're talking about the work you did.
Talking about this here, correct.
Do you see a need for us to move on this quickly?
Well, I think by the end of April, you should have a draft that you're gonna send to CROG, and that's a month from now, so.
You'd have to do 35 days for CROG, then.
CROG, and then you're gonna hope
30
public
day
hearings in
notification
June.
For hearing.
To meet the 7/1 deadline? Is
Yeah,
this-
7/1 is when it's effective, so I don't
Okay.
want an application coming here 7/1 without regulations in place.
I see.
You know, otherwise, you're just gonna not have the control that you might have.
Gotcha.
So part 2 of this is the parking requirement, and that's the one that, I'll be honest with you, is a little bit more difficult for me to really write the regulation related to, because what essentially they're saying is you can't require parking anymore for residential developments that are under 16 units in size. You can recommend them, but, you know, on-street parking or shared parking or those kinds of things, apparently in a lot of communities, that's adequate to make parking work. My feeling has always been, and I've talked to a lot of developers about developments like this, is they don't want a parking problem. they don't wanna build excess parking. So they kinda know to a T what their parking needs are. And I will say that, you know, the town center regulation, the Sullivan Ave overlay, which is Geisler's, and probably even Buckland Road, those were all done in participation with developers who had projects in mind. And they kinda guided the parking requirements that are in those regulations. And I think you'll see that they're not overparked, it's like 1.75 units, or it's not an excessive amount. So I don't think we have the parking problem that maybe some communities have. Certainly, we're gonna have to comply. We can't require more than one per unit, one bedroom unit, or two for a two-bedroom unit. And, you know, when we get to 1.75, you know, maybe we need to clean that up a little bit, but, I kind of just drafted this to be, you know, we gotta comply with the law, and then what happens is if it's a big project, they do a parking analysis, and they tell you based on their parking analysis what they're gonna build. And you really kinda have to accept it unless you feel that there's a real safety issue with what they're proposing. The other part of this, and again, this is something that I'm not really thinking we need to do anything about at this point, the law goes on to say if you're a community where parking is a problem, and let's say you're a downtown area and we're gonna add housing in the downtown and we're really gonna create a parking, you can, through a methodology that's quite complicated but spelled out in the law, create what they call traffic mitigation districts, 2 of them, congestive districts. So you can highlight areas of your town that say this is an area that, you know, it's a zone that you can't create parking for your multifamily in because it meets certain parameters of being too congested from traffic. Traffic mitigation districts or something like that they labeled. I don't really see we will have that issue here. But if you ever got to a point where parking was something on our streets, a problem, you could look to do something like that. Did you have something else?
Mind if I ask a couple of questions? It's just because I need to bring this to town council and I want to make sure I understand what.
I definitely want you involved in this because I'm sitting here thinking, well, hold your thoughts for a second. I don't think any of us, other than you, of course, would have a clue as to how applicable this is or is not based on the new laws. I mean, we could just say this is fine, but if everyone looked at it, to me, you have to have an understanding of what the laws are, to look at this and say, yeah, this seems to comply. Now, I have 100% confidence in you, and I have no issue with anything you do because you are you. That being said, I don't know how we would move forward with these changes and be comfortable to move quickly like, you know, you're discussing in terms of having a public hearing and, you know, getting this approved through CROG. So, if you have thoughts on that.
Well, I have a couple of questions just for clarification. All right, so because there's really 2 different things here.
Two different uses we have to allow for.
So let's just start with mixed use. Commercial on, or not residential on first floor. Did I just read that correctly?
Correct. So my understanding, and again, this is something that I would want the town attorney to agree with me on.
Yeah.
Is that you can restrict it that way. That's my understanding, whether it's 1 unit or 50 units, you can restrict it that way.
So it was just for a second, commercial on first floor and then residential above it. What, I don't remember these off the top of my head. What are our height restrictions in commercial?
Most zones are 3 stories. You know, we restricted commercials 3-story to general commercials 3-story. Buckland Gateway, the further you get away, you can go taller. 90 feet.
You get away from
Buckland
going
Road,
to Sullivan or to
Further away from Buckland Road you go, right? So that you have 4 or 5 stories down where the apartments could be, right? But basically, 2 or 3 stories you're gonna find.
So that's the first question. I don't see anything in here about our ability to control density.
So what I think is gonna control density is going to be your coverage ratios, right? So you have an impervious coverage ratio for a site in a commercial zone. You can only cover 65% of the lot with pavement. So you kinda gotta work backwards to what your parking needs are, what your building sizes are, that kind of thing. So
That aspect of our zoning regulations does still apply?
yes, you can have requirements. They just are as of right requirements, right? It's like we currently have for any office in a or commercial zone, they have requirements that they have to meet.
Well, we
It
have,
has a
we
right.
have parking requirements that we require, but if.
But now that, but we can in the residential part of it, right? That's gonna be different.
Right, so I just wanna make sure, cause there's a.
And the other
conflict.
thing I did in this too, because nobody's saying we can't, is I'm assuming this is, you know, anybody kind of housing, I put in affordability
Good.
component. Because again, every 10th unit puts us behind if
Yeah.
we don't have one. So if they wanna throw 9 units in here, you know, you'll have to do 15% on affordable.
So start again on the mixed use. So Kroski's come on in, would be eligible for this. I'm just picking some
Yeah,
stuff
think
off
it's,
the
yeah,
top,
yeah,
okay?
absolutely, yep.
In theory, well, actually, no, would that be retail? In theory, where behind Joanne's Fabric.
Yeah, that would be design commercial, absolutely.
That would apply. Red Cabin, and a whole slew of stuff that goes when you go
On
down.
Sullivan, yeah.
So, but you know, but we've been told over and over again that nobody will do mixed use with commercial with residential above it. So I don't know how much of that you'll see. The other is restricted to 9 units. So if you don't do the
That's the
mixed use,
transit.
if you don't do a mixed use building, you only get 9 units. Right. So that's,
So I think we're at a little bit of risk on, like, that's really, to me, that's probably really interesting for Kroski's property, Red Cabin, and, I mean,
there's a
Dicers
couple,
already has it.
I think there's a couple like small ones that might yield some duplexes or triplexes right in our, you know, residential right next to a commercial use already. There's some small lots around there that, you know, I could
Sullivan.
find a handful of them for you if you.
There are a few.
Yeah.
Now, the transit, or the, right, the
Transit
transit
middle.
community middle housing. Is the no parking really intended for that? Because in theory, transit-oriented housing is adjacent to,
Yeah, I think they
Transit.
really should have
Some-
used this word because it's not related to transit oriented. It's really, it's different. And they shouldn't have used the word transit because I agree with you, it's confusing. But basically, the law says if it's 16 or less units, you cannot have a parking requirement. What does it say? I'm putting recommendations in there, right? So I'm still suggesting that they provide a certain amount of parking. Again, my experience is developers don't want parking problems, especially if you're a rental guy, you know, I mean, you don't want them, so but the flip side of it, and the reason I think this law has been put in is because there are a lot of communities that have a really heavy parking requirement with multifamily. And so they have to spend a lot of money meeting this requirement, and the money doesn't get to be put into units and land, that kind of thing. So that's my understanding of where it comes from.
and under that scenario, are we still at the maximum impervious coverage on a lot that would exist for, I'm trying to pick, like, if we go down, perfect example, where Four Elements used to be next, right?
Next to Mitchell.
Next to Mitchell, those two houses right there. So that's two separate, they used to be residential, but they're commercial. They used to be residences, but that's commercial zoning.
Well, actually, one's in there by variance, the others, one is office conversion overlay zone, but the Mitchell Fuel is still residentially zoned, it's not, it's a commercial use on a residential property. So, but the office conversion overlay is the yellow house there, that could be one.
So is there any, like, what is the maximum
See, now
coverage on that?
that's, you have the underlining RR zone, so it's gonna be small, it's not gonna be, you're gonna get to a building coverage max before anything else. So,
Well, we could have a bunch of those little ones, because it's gonna
You
be more
might-
profitable to build
you
4,
might
5,
find
or
some
6
small
than a
units
house.
popping up.
And that has no retail or commercial
Correct,
requirement.
no requirement at all, no, up to none. Anybody goes down Dart Hill Road, I just noticed going over the town line to the right there in Vernon, there's 2, I would say quadplexes maybe?
My in-laws live in Quail
You know what
Hollow,
I'm
which is
talking
right
about?
next door to it. Those are only just, that's 4 units.
4 units, okay, so 2 duplexes next week, or 1 quadplex, I can't
It's a
remember
quad-
what.
it's a
It's a quadplex, it's, you know, that's why I'm hoping they'll do some more with the architecture at the front, I'm sure it's not done yet, but. So, you know, you're starting to see different kinds of housing popping up like that.
We have quite a few developers in town that like that kind of project. They don't want to do.
They're smaller
Yeah,
developments.
yeah.
You know, personally, I think some of the more successful developments we have been some of those smaller, you know, when you're creating density, kind of those pocket developments seem to be the least impactful on folks.
Now,
And
would these requirements apply to interior lots as well?
interior lots are only in residential zones, and these don't apply to
Okay.
residential zones, so no, they would not.
The Geisler's Plaza was going to be, in the initial planning, residential and commercial, but a lot bigger than,
Yeah, that's because we created a zoning regulation that allowed it. So that was based on a regulation that we put in place.
okay. Would this, any of this impact what they could do if they decide to go forward?
It could, I mean, again, any commercial property would be able to take advantage of it. So it would, you know, if they were to go forward with the plan they had, they wouldn't have any room to do this. But if they were to decide they didn't wanna go forward with the plan they had and do another 9 units, I suppose they'd probably be able to, because they're 2 separate lots there. See, that's where it kind of, from my perspective, you know, some people own properties next to each other, but they're under separate deeds, and I guess this one gets 1 9 and this gets 9, and that's where it's just like, wow.
Oh.
It doesn't seem like, it seems like there should be some limitation on that, but I haven't seen any yet. You know, the other thing about density that I always go back to when I think of density really depends on the size of units you're gonna have, right? You know what I mean? If you're gonna do 4.5 units per acre and they're gonna be gigantic units, you're gonna cover a lot more land and whatever than if you do 700 square foot units at 4.5 units per acre, right? So I don't know if density is the best measurement sometimes when it comes to this kind of housing. You almost have to, I mean, it's a measurement, almost floor area ratio or something like that you're looking at, but.
Even with the affordability ratio of 15%, if we leave that in there, the issue for us is developers are gonna try and maximize the revenue. Therefore, you're gonna put, I know 3 bedrooms aren't allowed, but they're gonna put 2 bedrooms in, which is gonna have an impact on the school system. And that's, you know, from a budgetary standpoint, that's like, it's a problem. Obviously, everybody's been watching where we are with finances. That creates and poses a fairly significant challenge for our finances.
And you're not gonna have a choice but to allow it. As of right.
We're bringing a lot of other issues into this, aren't we?
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, so if we move on this, and let's say, we're all good with it, it goes to CROG, they're good with it, have a public hearing, everything looks good, and we codify it.
Mhm.
Is there any risk, because there's so much more that's happening with this whole initiative, are we any risk of having done this too quickly, that we might have to
Again,
revise?
July 1, a developer can come in and propose it. So whether you have regulations or not, I mean, you don't have to adopt anything, but you are at risk of someone coming in and just doing something without putting any kind of measures in place. Maybe that doesn't concern you, I don't know. It concerns me a little bit, not that what we're proposing is that radical, because the site plan, you know, but I do like the idea of having some requirements.
So that July 1st is in the law?
The law says that this is effective July 1st.
Okay,
that
so they'd have
commercial
to
properties
amend the
can become-
law to push it out?
Yeah, yeah.
And
The
then-
first trigger of
That's it.
anything towns need to do is July 1st, and it's
Okay.
commercial
It's pretty cut and dry.
zones. Yeah, it's pretty clear in the law
Yep,
that it's
yep.
effective July 1st, but whether or not you choose to do anything about it is your commission's decision.
No.
I guess if you didn't and someone wanted to do it, I would have them just follow the underlying zoning regulations to the extent that they could.
What do you think? Move on it? We don't have a choice, do we?
I think you need to have your this is my external opinion, I think maybe the subcommittee meeting, the 4 of you, right, and discussing, because some of this is, you added some stuff to this.
What do you mean I added what?
Well, you're adding the parking requirement for transit, that under the transit section. Because there's language in there under number 3, which requires parking.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, so this is very drafty, yeah, there's some of the stuff in there, I probably have some requirements that I think I was gonna be putting in as suggested requirements, not like per requirements for parking. But as far as landscaping and parking areas, you know,
Yeah.
I would expect that to go to our regulations, and like I said, full cutoff lighting and, you know, good design, I mean,
Yeah.
that's standard of what we
Standard
do
stuff.
with any project in any zone, right?
think
So
we
we
should.
would expect it
So-
with this.
So I would think like as quickly as the town attorney can get back to you with a final, like, not, yeah, final interpretation of what.
The few questions that are still out there. And like I said, I have two more sessions that are, you know, people are really wading into it, and like Krog is doing some work in some other towns along, you know, this line. And so the biggest question I have is about summary review. Should we really add that as a separate category? And I'm leaning against it, but if the town attorney says absolutely, I'm not gonna tell, you know, I'll follow the town attorney's advice. And he, you know, he's wanting to make sure he's, you know, he's doing the same seminars I'm doing to make sure he's understanding it as best he can. So, you know, I don't think anything that I put in front of you is really radical. I mean, it's not really great changes, or, you know, again, I took the model of what we already had for a mixed use
Right.
and used it for like how much storage space you should have, or those, you know, some of the principles in it. So it's not a terribly complicated one to tweak or to change or whatever, however we want to do it. I think we just have to have some legal advice on it and then just commit to what we think is the
I
best.
agree,
So.
Michelle.
One other odd question. So if I'm thinking about Red Cabin, could you do both on one parcel?
You know, that's a good question. I don't know, it doesn't seem to me
As long
that
as you
you would
don't
be
exceed-
prohibited to, you wouldn't be able to do more than 9 single units,
Right.
right? But
But you could do
mixed use
a whole
other- I
bunch
think
of
you could,
yeah.
other stuff
Yeah.
and 9.
I think you could.
I think probably the thing to do is, once you get feedback from the attorney,
Mhm.
let me know. And then you and I can kind of talk about setting up a meeting, and we'll pick a Monday, and I'll email it out, and we'll see if Kevin and Caesar are available, and we'll just do it.
Now, would the approved lot or space across from Stop and Shop, would they be able to change their plan to add housing on that?
The town center?
Yeah.
See,
What is
so
it, Newberry?
You know, that's restricted commercial zoning there. So, you know, the town center is an overlay village district, right? So it's not, I'm not putting in the village district overlay, because if you wanna do it, you have the underlining zone that exists with criteria already. So they could take advantage of it under the restricted commercial zone.
They could, okay.
And that's some of what towns are being challenged with, those that do have village district zoning that don't have it as an overlay. They're having to write it, and they're really getting caught up on how they write it in their village district zoning. But again, we have an underlying zone there that people can take advantage of, and it's just easier to keep it in the restricted commercial portion of it. Because all that's zoned that way.
So the town attorney's.
He's got it in his hands, he's looking at it, yeah.
So it's town attorney interpretation.
We'll do some more,
Paul, you set
Finessing
your
of it.
subcommittee meeting up, you review it, make any modifications and amendments.
we'll come back to the full commission one more time for it, I would think.
Then it goes to CROG, then it comes back, public hearing, vote.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay.
All right,
Plan.
bonds,
Excellent.
Okay, I don't have any bonds.
no bonds,
No.
but we do have a little note here.
Yeah, I've got a couple things on applications to be officially received. So we had received 245 Pleasant Valley Road, which is that temporary and conditional permit for the concrete guy. That was received a while ago. They requested to do that as a staff level approval for another 2 years, which we allowed under the TNC. The same request has come in for the soccer guy over there. He's requesting the TNC staff level. And then I do have a request that you're looking at on the small sheet, which is from Tesla at Target. They would like to put in, I think it's some like 6 or 8 spaces there. And again, we have a provision that they're requesting staff level approval, unless you folks want them to come and show you them. I could show you on a plan where they're going right now.
I'm good with staff level approval on that. And is there any reason the Simmons soccer field TNC can't be?
No, unless you, I mean, it's been going on for 10, 12, 16 years, so.
Yeah.
So that can be staff level, right? Okay,
I wanted to show you our new signs,
You can
Very
finally see 'em.
nice. Oh,
and they're reusable. No, I
Very-
mean, I'm
yes.
figuring people can, and we have a lot of stanchions to put them on, so. Yeah, bit the bullet and got good ones.
Is that your phone number, Michelle?
No, it's Josh's.
It's Josh's?
Yeah.
Oh.
Way to go, Josh.
Yeah.
You gonna raise with
Let me
that?
just,
It's
I wanna
more of a
make sure I didn't
general.
have it. The other thing I just wanna remind you is Monday night is the town council event on the 30th. I will unfortunately am out of town, I won't be there, but that's the event, I don't know what you're calling it.
Mayor's Forum.
Oh,
The Mayor's
Mayor's
Forum, yes, I'm
Forum,
sorry,
yeah, yeah,
May 30th. So if you haven't RSVP'd,
Yeah.
I think Kathy would like to know.
We're all going, right? Raise your hands. Who's going, P and Z? Come on. Come on.
The,
Beza, no? Oh, we gotta show up.
yeah, we gotta
All right,
show
just
up.
my
May
thoughts.
30th?
May 30th.
May 30th.
So then, just to look at your agenda, you know, we really don't have anything to add to it right now, but the 14th is a ways away.
30th?
I'm sorry, March. Oh,
Yeah.
Mark, of course.
Oh, March 30th?
March
Yeah,
30th.
yeah.
It was a reschedule. Yeah, I'm so sorry.
I'm on vacation.
So 3 weeks would be April 14th, so maybe we'll have a revision to be able to share with you on the 14th.
Oh, okay.
I'm away the 28th at a conference, so.
Yeah, I have it on.
I did send you an email about 2 upcoming trainings. One of them is on Saturday, April 18th, and that's a basic training for new land use commissioners, or if you need a refresher. The other one is on Saturday, May 16th, about map reading and mapping resources. That one is in person only. The other one is either online or in person. So if anyone is interested, let us know. Get you signed up.
Anything else? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
No, you
Oh,
make the
I
motion.
Make a motion to adjourn this meeting.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you.